Welcome to the part 2 of most mistakes junior UiUX designer make. So in this particular video, we'll be talking about two web development terminology, which is Box Model and Flexbox. So if you have not watched the part 1, I'm going to leave a link to it up here or in the description box. So it's very important we as junior designers or UI/UX designers understand these two web development terminology, because this design we are currently looking at is a website design and is going to be coded with HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So it's better your design is in line with this terminology, because most times some designers just feel that UI/UX is graphics where they draw boxes, they draw this. They don't know that Figma itself is like a no code tool for like front end development. Like the way Figma is being built is like the no code way of front end development. They created the version where you can design, but behind the scene what they are designing should reflect front end development. So as we move on, you understand what I mean. So first, let's start with box model. So box model is basically a way in which the browser renders HTML elements. So HTML is basically like the way in which the skeletal structure of website is being built. CSS adds styling to the HTML, while JavaScript adds functionality. So what box model is saying that is like a box inside another box. So let me draw a rectangle for me to explain better so that you understand. So this is the first box. So inside this box we have another box, and inside this another box we have another box. So the box, most times the box might not end depending on the project you are working on. Inside this third box we have another box. So that's the basic way in which HTML element is rendered in the browser. So bringing it back to our design. So remember that when we started creating this, the first thing we drew was a frame, and inside that frame we created an auto layout, and inside that auto layout we added a text. This text itself, let me zoom in a bit. So this text itself is in its own box. So you can see this text is in its own auto layout. This too is in its own auto layout, and these two, they are meshed together in its own auto layout too. So it's like the boxes that we're talking about. So let me explain another way so that you understand. So let me use another section of this design. So if we look at this particular place, you can see that in over here we have a text. This text is in its own box. This image is in its own box. So all these you can frame them. After framing them, you put them in an auto layer. That means like merging them together. So when you merge them together, they are in its own auto layout. So let me recreate this box in the order of our design. So let's recreate it here together so that you understand, because it's always good you understand this kind of terminology. So first we are going to create a frame. Remember what I said in part 1. If you have not watched part 1, I'm going to leave a link below the video or on top so that you can watch it. So let me give this frame a color. Let me give it another color so that it will look different. So don't mind the color riot, I'm just using it for example. So this one now is a box. We drew a frame. So inside this frame we have to define our auto layout. So we're going to right click on this frame, add auto layout. So when we add auto layout, we're going to give it a padding. This box have a padding, also have a horizontal padding and a vertical padding. That's how it is on HTML. So we have to make sure we define the horizontal padding. So we'll be giving here 56. So remember what I said, how we got that 56 is from the 56 we gave in our margin on our grid. So we gave that 56 here so that any element we are going to place is just going to be on top of the grid. Is not going to pass this grid line that is here. So remember, when designing websites, elements are not supposed to like be at the edge, like glued to the wall or the edge. There has to be some padding that has to be given, which is normal. So for the vertical padding, we can give 56. Let's just give 56 because we're creating this section. So let me bring out just this text now. So I'll drag this text. So you can see here we have our text here. So before I place this text, here inside this box, what I'm going to do is to make sure I make this box to have a fixed height and a fixed width. So I'll just come over here. So I'll click on this fixed height and a fixed width. In part 1, I mentioned the reason why I'm doing so you can watch part 1 to understand fully. So I'll make it to have a fixed height and a fixed width. Then before I put this here, I will convert this to an auto layer because this text itself, it has to be in its own box. But what we are going to do now is that despite the fact we put this in its own box by adding auto layout, the left the horizontal and vertical padding of this particular text is going to be 0 because we have already defined the main padding that we're using for this section in the parent container. So this is like a house that is going to house this text content. So now that I've put this in auto layout and the padding of this is 0 because we don't need it here because of this padding we have defined. So I will just drag it inside this place. So once I drag it here, you can see that it lapped exactly where we want it to lap. It didn't cross the grid. So now that we have this text inside this container, so we're going to convert this to fill container horizontal because we don't just want it to just clip here. It's better it just fills the container because this is the only text we're going to have at this top section. So I'm going to make it fill container so that it can fill the main container, which is the parent container here. It can fill it. So now that we have fill it, so I don't know if you understand the difference. Let me Ctrl Z again. Formerly this was how the bounding box of the text was. This is where it is. So I just want it to fill the parent container so that it will be very easy for the developer to code, because most of all these things here, terminology, fixed width, hot content, fill container, they are all front-end terminology. So you have to make sure you design with all these things. This is like the no code way. In coding, when a front-end developer is coding, they are going to make use of the coded version of all these fixed container. There are HTML and CSS code that represent this fixed width, fill container when they are coding. But since Figma is just giving us the option for us to just select it, so we're just going to go ahead and select it. Then when a developer sees it, they can create it with code. So we'll just make it fill container so that it will be easy, because in HTML there is nothing like space like that at the top. It's either fill container or content when it has to do with something like this. Then now that we have this fill container, we'll just move this to the end so that it can lap by the side of its own container. So now that we have this, the next thing we're going to add now is the image. We have this image here and we have this text here. So how to achieve this is that whenever you're also designing, one important thing to note is that you need to make sure that this image is seated on the grid, whether a positive grid or a negative. What I mean by positive is that, let me say for example now, from what we have here, we have 12 columns, which is 1, 2, these grid lines, there are 12 columns. And when designing, you need to make sure that your element is either seated in like 3 elements can be seated. Let me use another illustration to explain this so that you understand better. So when placing elements on your Figma frame, on your desktop frame, so you can make sure that elements are seated on the grid. So especially when we have like a 12 column grid like this, you can put elements on two columns like this. So this is just a square, it's seated on two columns. Elements can also sit on three columns and also four columns. But there are also scenarios where you might want an element to sit on five columns, and then the second element is going to take the remaining element. So this is basically depending on the design pattern you want to use for your UI design. So let's apply it now to our own design. So in this case, we have an image here and a text. So this image is seated inside a blob. Sorry for the background noise. So this image is seated inside a blob. So right now I want it to be on five column, while the remaining column, the text is going to be there. So this image is going to be in its own container. So because this is an image, the first thing I'm going to do is to right click, put it inside the frame, and right click again and also make it auto layout, like for it to be in its own box. Remember, we are trying to explain deeply the box model, how we can use the box model as UI/UX designer to improve our work. So this design now, this image rather, is inside its own box. And now for this case, since it's an auto layer, there is no need to give it a horizontal padding and a vertical padding, and or a space in between, because it's just an image. It's not all elements you are going to add padding to. So remember, our parent frame already have the horizontal and vertical padding defined. So I'm going to also add auto layer to this text so that we can add the padding to this text. So this text, as you can see here, I'm going to remove the space between to 0. The horizontal padding, I'm going to give a spacing to only the left horizontal padding. So for the vertical padding, I'm going to make it 0 because I'm going to use fill container in a bit to achieve that. So now, this text is in its own container and this image is in its own container. So now both of them are going to be in the same container, despite the fact they have their own individual container. So the space between here is 0. So because we already have the horizontal width of this, which is the left horizontal width of this text, to be 56, there is no need to add in space between anymore. So we'll just keep it 0. So without adding this horizontal width here, where we'll make it 56, you will notice that the text is going to be too close to this image. So to make it to not be close, let there be breathing space. So we added that horizontal padding, make it 56. You can also increase it to 80. So 56, 80, they are all divisible by 8. Whenever I'm using spacing, I always choose numbers that are divisible by 8. So now that we have this inside their own box, we'll now drag it into our parent container. So now this our parent container. Now we can define the space in between. That means the space, so we can define the space in between. That means the space between these two contents, we can make it 56, especially when we want a breathing space between these two elements. So, and let me also go ahead and define the spacing under it. So let me drag this down because this was glued to this image, so I'll just drag it down. So here, that's okay. So now for this container, you can see here is in hub content. So because of what we did here, if you have not watched the part 1 of this video, I advise you do so that you understand how we started in this design, so that you understand, so that you get everything fully of how we started. So now for this second container, because this first one we made it to fill container, remember what I said, in front end development there is nothing like leaving space here. Everything like this has to be defined because it also has its own spacing. So you cannot just design and keep it this way and say, oh, the developer is going to know. No, this space means something, it represents something. So you have to make sure you give that representation very well with your design so that it will be easy for the developer to code. So right now in front-end development, there is nothing like leaving space this way. Instead, the terminology that is being used in this kind of situation is fixed with hub content or fill container. So this is like the no code way of all these things in HTML and CSS or in front-end development. All these things represent codes, but since Figma is giving us the no code way, we just click a button and it's going to adjust with the help of auto layout. So if you have any question, don't forget to ask in the comment section. I'm always happy to reply your comments. So for this particular content here we have, so we just make it fill container because we don't want that space to be vacant. And I also did the same thing here. I made the content to fill its current container. So for this content which is here too, so if you notice this image and this text, they are not in the same height. You can see the bounding box of the text and the bounding box of this image. What I mean by bounding box is this blue line that is around this image. So for this particular image now, I will also make it fill container, which is horizontal fill container and vertical fill container. So fill container horizontally is going to make it to space out. The bounding box is going to fill its container, and horizontal fill container will make it to be in the same height with the image. So you can see the bounding box of the text and the bounding box of the image. They are all the same way now. So with this now, we can place the text anyhow we want it. It can be centralized or whichever. So this is basically how to achieve this. So we can also go ahead and make this two to also be in its auto layout too. So this can be in its auto layout, making the spacing between to be 56. So this is what it means by box model. You can see the first box that we created has its own auto layout. Inside that box, it has a box too that houses two different sections. This one has its own auto layout, which is a box. This one too house its own box too, which is also auto layout is also added to it too. This one is also in a box. This one is also in a box. So that's basically what box model is all about, creating element that is inside the box that is inside the box. So doing things like this is very easy for a developer to code. So the no code way of Flexbox is designing with these elements here. So let me click on this. So you can see here we have fill container, hug content, fix width. So I don't know if you remember how we are using that in this design. For this first frame that we created, we made it to have a fixed width so that it's not going to hug its children. What I mean by children is the content that is inside the parent container, each child element. So we made it fixed width and fixed height, because all these things, when a developer is coding it, they are going to use code to define it. So most designers, when they design, they just dump things on the screen. They don't know how to make use of this element hug content. So for this now, if you want this to hug its content now, you can see this is a box. So if you say hug content now, is going to hug its content, which is this text now. So the hug content also have horizontal hug content and vertical hug content. So I'll just do it. So you can see now it has hug this particular content. So if we make it now fill container, you can see it's filling the container its own parent, because it's like nested. Inside this container we have another container which have another container. So this one now is in its own container too. This one is in its own container, and it also have another container that is bounding them. So this now, once you use fill container, is going to fill its own container. That means the container that is holding these two elements.